Hello, everybody. You're listening to the Big Chill Podcast. This is episode 42, talking takedowns with Frank Molinaro. All right. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Big Chill Podcast. Today, we have a special guest, Frank Molinaro. He's a four-time All-American wrestler at Penn State. He was the 2012 NCAA champ. I believe he was undefeated that season. No big deal. And he was a 2016 U.S. Olympian. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Cool. So the first question I have right off the bat, and I know you get asked this a lot, where did the nickname Gorilla Hulk come from?
I got that wrestling in the Southern Scuffle in college my junior year. I went from 141 to 149 and put on a lot of muscle and strength. And that's when I started really getting to my feet on my finishes and slamming people down. So they started calling me the Gorilla Hulk there, and then it kind of stuck.
Yeah. Did you like it the whole time? Was that a nickname that you were? Yeah.
First time I heard it, I think it gave me a little extra strength. So it was good. More incentive.
It's a weird nickname, though, if you think about it, because it's like you're the Hulk, so you're really big, but then they're slightly ripping on the fact that you're a little short, so you have like a gorilla height. Like they took two really strong things and just combined them, but made sure they knew you weren't that tall. You're not the Hulk size.
That's right. Now my kids all like love the Hulk and stuff, and they call me Gorilla Hulk now. My kids, it's funny.
So that's why the gorilla, I've never thought of it that way. That's why the gorilla was added in to imply the size aspect. I kind of thought
I had no idea.
I just thought you were like so mega that you needed the combination of both.
Yeah, that could be it. So I guess I'll kind of start out. The first question I had is now, which we didn't actually mention, you're now assistant coach at Arizona State. And so now you're kind of getting back into the team aspect of it. But one of the things I always think that's interesting about wrestling is it's a really individual sport. Like it's you and one other person on the mat. But throughout like your younger part of your career, even through university, you're always on a team and, you know, you're still competing with like your best friends and everyone, and you have that team camaraderie. How difficult is it once university ends and you want to make your career out of it? How difficult is it to go from that team aspect of and then just being all on your own?
I think it's a pretty lonely road. You know, it's a different kind of journey. I think you hit the nail on the head. It's really fun and, you know, really just helps you get better and improve being in that environment and that atmosphere in the college setting with that camaraderie and competition day in and day out. It's definitely more lonely. You know, you don't have the same amount of resources. You're not in the university's system, having them train you with their methods. It's, you know, but on the flip side, I'd say the fun part of it is if you're really innovative, you get to kind of create your own flavor, you know, after college. Most colleges you go to, you see the whole team wrestles with a kind of a consistent theme, you know, score points, have fun, or Iowa style, grind them down. But, you know, when I took that next step and, you know, wanted to become an Olympian, it was more my style. And, you know, I just took bits and pieces from everybody. But the hardest part was just not having the same amount of personalized planning and scheduling and everything. So definitely felt different.
That's kind of an interesting point, I guess, because it's one of those sports where I never thought about what, in a sense, it's like professional status after competing as on a collegiate level, although obviously continuing as an Olympian. Right. So how does that kind of work in terms of, obviously you have a support system from sponsors, but how do you determine which events you go to? How do you qualify for specific events? Like what's that sort of the year-round schedule like?
Yeah, that's a good question. The key is to kind of know the ending before the beginning. And then once you know that, you have your apex competition. You plan backwards, you know, and usually let's say if the Olympic trials is your apex competition, you know, then you start there and then you have 4 or 5 markers, you know, and these are kind of your key competitions, and you plan about 4 or 5 to probably compete about usually 3 to, you know, anywhere from a 6-week to an 8-week training camp. I don't really like to go longer than, this is just me personally. I think 8 weeks is kind of the max. Anything after that is too long of being in a regimented routine on eating restricted calories, kind of in that state of mind every single day. So, usually you have about 8 weeks, and then you take a week to recover and evaluate the tournament, and then you're on to the next training camp. So about 3 weeks in between each competition, and then 6 to 8 weeks long. So 4 or 5 planning backwards from, that apex competition, where that's the one where you want to feel the best for. Some of the competitions in the beginning, you're just testing the water. You're getting used to your routines, making weight, warming up, traveling, competing, wrestling in a 2-day tournament, making weight 2 days in a row, wrestling 4 or 5 matches, in a 2-hour period, and then coming back and wrestling. There's all these different scenarios that you have to get used to. And once you kind of go through the tournaments and you do them enough times, you kind of dial in your routine. And then by the time you get to the Olympic trials, at that point, you're not trying to learn anything else. You've already learned everything that you can. Now you're just trying to repeat it and be consistent and be emotionally fresh at the end.
Okay. And then do you have to take care of like all the administrative stuff in terms of like booking flights, booking hotels, and all the stuff that would go along with attending a tournament? Do you handle that yourself? Does the tournament take care of it? Do you have like someone you pay to take care of all that kind of stuff?
No, I've always been, lucky enough to have a few sponsorships. One of them is a national club. So you have, let's say you have the Sunkissed Kids Wrestling Club. They're going to do all of your travel. They're going to do all of making sure you have the right memberships and license and all of that kind of operational stuff you don't have to do. And then usually a lot of my salary comes from, one of them comes from the national team. So if you're top 3 for the United States in each weight class, you get basically a stipend per month, and you get insurance as well, elite level insurance. And then I'll have like a sponsorship like Nike where I have a stipend, and then let's say like $5,000 in retail for the year. Then you have a supplement sponsorship. I have, at that time it was MHP, Maximum Human Performance, get $1,000 a month, $500 in supplements. So that kind of covered all that. Then I had a meal sponsorship. So, $200 of food per week. That made it really easy to kind of get down to weight and not have to worry about shopping and cooking and what to eat and et cetera. So there's a lot of sponsorships. And then we have something for the Olympic level post-college. It's called a regional training center, where people graduate from college that have Olympic aspirations, and, they can train at the universities. So they pay a stipend. USA Wrestling pays a stipend. And then you just kind of pick up bits and pieces. And I always tried to just not go crazy with the sponsorships, but I just wanted stuff that I would use and that would help me perform better. So like I said, diet, supplements, that type of stuff.
So like during the year, then you would be training at the regional center and then periodically going to the actual Olympic training center. What was that like?
That was great. I love, all of my time spent at the Olympic Training Center. I'd say I probably spent like 6 to 12 weeks every year from 2013 till, present day. But it's always real good because it's very isolated. It feels like you're in a prison almost out there. You're looking at white walls, dorm rooms with some random roommate. You got no privacy. You got to walk down the hallway for the bathroom, and it's nothing but wake up, wrestle, recover, wrestle, recover, wrestle, sleep, wrestle. So those were always good trips for me to focus, but also I liked it because it brought the whole national team together. So, you do your training at your regional training center, and then you go test yourself at these training camps, because usually we have match day simulations, a lot of live wrestling, and, you get different feels and different partners and kind of see where you're at. And then you go back to your regional training center and you make improvements. So I've always liked my time there. Plus Colorado's cool.
So like if that were, let's say, like Olympic trial year, when you go to that training center for their camps, I guess you're wrestling the guys that you're then going to face come Olympic trials, right? So they bring in like the top 5 or something like that for each weight to come into the training center. So how does that work? I mean, this is something I've always wondered with wrestling, is some of the guys that you end up competing with against in the finals are the people that you'll wrestle with on a, daily basis, even sometimes if you're on the same team. When you wrestle those guys, are you giving it everything? Are you holding some back? Are you holding some moves back? Like you don't want them to see everything? Like what's the mentality training with someone that could then be your competitor, especially even like something like going to the Olympics? That's crazy.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for me, I do a lot of mental warfare. You know my style. I like to mess with people, but it's real simple. When I feel really, really good, I make them think I feel really weak. Maybe I act more tired. Maybe I even give up a few takedowns, or when I feel really weak, like they're getting over on me, that's where I'll really turn up my intensity and attack, and really be aggressive and try to back them down. So it's always kind of, for me, the times where I was at the training center, I used every practice, every sprint, every little sports game that we played just to get in people's head and break them. And, I think it works. I remember wrestling people in 2014 and it was just an exhibition match. But, to me, it was like, this was the number one guy in my weight class for 3 years in a row. For me, I had nothing to lose. It was an opportunity for him to, be afraid the next time he wrestled me. And I wrestled him at Arizona State in the finals of like the World Championship simulation camp, and I broke him and pinned him, and I don't think he ever forgot about it. So it's important to make sure, when you get those opportunities against the top guys, maybe you test yourself, or maybe you just let them, unload and see what they got and save your best moves and save a little trick. So it's all mental, especially in fighting. Fighting's the same too.
That makes sense. You mentioned the mental aspect there. Is there a lot of trash talking in wrestling, like during an actual fight?
Yeah, it's the corniest trash talk you've ever heard, though. These wrestlers are the worst trash talkers ever. Maybe they don't have enough practice yet, because now it's kind of like a new thing. They're trying to build the brand and build wrestling. And so, most of the time I'm all for it. I guess my only reservation with trash talking in wrestling is it's an Olympic sport. It's not like a show business like the UFC and stuff. So, and it's also a really small community. So people have their feelings get hurt pretty easily.
Yeah, that's good. That's a tough one to walk back if you say something on the mat and then try and hang out with the guy like 2 days later.
Yeah.
You mentioned the UFC there, and that was one of the things I kind of wanted to touch on. I know that quite a lot of wrestlers have transitioned from like Olympic style wrestling into MMA. Was that ever something that tempted you?
Yeah, I always wanted to do fighting. I guess the one thing that held me back was I was still wrestling for the majority of that time. And then once I got to the end of wrestling, it's like, all right, I'm not going to go learn 20 years worth of skills, in 5-10 years out of my prime age. And now it's like these kids are starting to train for the UFC at such a young age. You see them grappling, you see their parents put them in wrestling, and they're doing all of these disciplines now at such a young age that I'm aware to the fact that I can't jump those kind of levels into fighting, but I also have, the skill of fighting. I think that's one of my best intangibles, is just being mentally strong and gritty. And, you see a lot of these fights won and lost, before they even walk out there. You can tell who's going to win most of the time.
Do you think that's good for the popularity of wrestling? The idea that parents are sticking their kids into wrestling with the view that they'll get into MMA, like it's one of the skills they need? Or do you, like, as someone who's now coaching at a kind of an elite level, do you think it's a shame that maybe like a talented wrestler is just using it as learning it as like part of the skill they want to move on to something else?
No, I think it's great. I saw the other day on Conor McGregor's Instagram, he had his kid at like wrestling practice, and he respects wrestling now. He knows what kind of a foundation it is. And I think outside of the actual skills that you learn in the body awareness and the functional strength, I think you really kind of learn resiliency and toughness, and just that whole process of going through training and competition and failure and wrestling. It really hardens people up. So it's a phenomenal base for UFC fighters. And it's also great for wrestling because, the more attention wrestling gets, the better. It's all good attention. We need to grow the sport. They almost dropped it from the Olympics in 2020. It's one of the original sports, Greco-Roman wrestling. So I think this is great for it.
So obviously, you're not going to make your jump into UFC now, but you have trained with a decent amount of UFC fighters, right? What's that like?
It's cool. Yeah, I got like 3 or 4 fighters that are going to be coming out here this year and training, and we're going to try to link up and do some grappling and roll around and just share some knowledge. So, I talked to a lot of these guys, and we trained over at Fight Ready where Paul Costa and Henry Cejudo and all those guys were training, and it was an exciting time for me. It was during like the lockdown, so we weren't allowed in the university, and it was cool for me to, I think we were there about 3 months to really see somebody at the beginning of a training camp, to see them kind of winding down to the end of a training camp, and just to see how professional they were with their training and just all the little details that matter. So, it's cool being around those guys, because it's a different obsession, but it's all, a martial art, and we can all kind of come to a common ground. So it's cool.
What area do you think, if you did have to make the leap right now, like which area do you think you'd have to work on the most in terms of to kind of be competitive in an MMA arena?
I would say distance control and controlling space, being able to control space without getting head kicked or beat down. Then the second part would be distance control, being able to gauge my distance, when to shoot, when to punch, and just kind of get that feel in the pocket.
How did you get into wrestling? Like, was it something that you kind of fell into, or did you have a fight and suddenly realize you were good at it? Like, how did you get into it? Because obviously there's tons of reasons why people can get into any sport, but obviously wrestling doesn't come across as like one of the obvious mainstream ones. So it would be interesting to know kind of how you got into it.
Right. Yeah. So when I was a kid, I tried all the sports. I did football, baseball. My parents pretty much put me in everything they could when I was a kid. And then once I got to high school, I really wanted to kind of specialize in wrestling. And I mean, I knew I wasn't going to be dunking on basketball rims. I wasn't tall. So football, even though I loved it, that was probably my first love. I just loved the aggression, and just everything about football is fun. And, but that's where I really locked in when I was probably 8th grade, going into 9th grade, and stopped playing all the other sports and just focused on wrestling in the summer. But I started wrestling when I was about 4 or 4.5. My parents took me to the local like recreation. It was like 6 weeks of just stance and shots and stuff. And then I wanted to do the next one after, and the next one after. And then I've only taken 1 year off, not even 6 months off wrestling since I was 4.5 years old. When I broke my ankle, that was the only time I stopped wrestling since then.
Now, is it true you've had a wrestling mat in your room since you were about 6 years old?
We have a wrestling mat in my living room when you walk in my house right now. 18 by 14 underneath the chandelier. But yeah, I always had a wrestling mat at my house and stuff. My parents were crazy.
Were you also, and I know that this might be kind of blasphemy for a Greco-Roman wrestler, were you into like entertainment wrestling, like WWF, WWE stuff? Was that also an interest?
Yeah, I went to Madison Square Garden to see The Undertaker, Stone Cold Steve Austin. A couple times we were at the Madison Square Garden Center, and I was pretty into it when I was a kid. It was fun. Good entertainment. There's a lot of wrestlers right now that are going from, college wrestling. I know I can't mention his name, but I know a wrestler right now. He's probably the number 1 guy at heavyweight right now to make an Olympic team. Some people would say number 1, 2, or 3. And I heard he might try to make the Olympics this year because he got offered $1 million something contract to go straight into WWE. So he's trying to make the Olympic team this year and then just forfeit college and go do WWE, be a millionaire, and then he can do whatever he wants, fighting. So it's real.
That would be awesome.
That would be awesome.
You get to go to the Olympics, then you come back and you're like the next Rock.
Oh. Good luck.
That'd be great. So I guess let's kind of just go through a little bit of your career. We'll start at Penn State. So now obviously Penn State is the powerhouse for wrestling, but that didn't really come back to them being, the powerhouse they are until halfway through your tenure at Penn State when Cael Sanderson came in, who's arguably the greatest wrestler of all time, is now coming to be your head coach. What was that like when you find out that Cael's going to be your head coach? Are you just to the moon excited? Are you actually a little nervous because you have this new person coming in who, obviously he's going to have his own mindset, was a little bit of both, what was going through your head?
Well, I mean, you can probably, relate to some of this since we were around Penn State at the same time. But for me, it was such a blessing in disguise, because I was at a crossroads in my career. I think some burnout, just some loss of enthusiasm, and a lot of failure my freshman year. And wasn't really sure if I was going to stay at Penn State or if I was going to like the coach. And that was a complete wild card. They kept it so off the radar. It wasn't even on the rumor mill. They flew him in a helicopter, and like the next day he got the job. So I think that was kind of something that they went after secretly and privately, and they never told us about it. So when I first found out, I mean, I remember we were all hanging out, and Kale called me and said, "Hey man, I like your intensity. I saw you wrestling at Nationals, the blood round to be an All-American. It got pretty chippy out there." He's like, "You said some pretty crazy stuff. You don't like that guy, do you?" And I was like, "Oh man," that was my first impression. Was on mat 11 at the NCAAs fighting with some guys. So it was really cool though, because Kale, he really changed my perspective with wrestling, and being that close to somebody that level of excellence, and just that daily consistency, and everything that I learned from him, I valued and implemented into my own coaching and strategy. And but I guess the one word, it was a blessing in disguise, because it really shocked the whole wrestling world.
And now, I mean, maybe you can't, but what's the biggest thing that you've taken away from Kale being your coach? Is there something, you said there's a lot of stuff you implement. Is there one in particular you can kind of think of, like one either training thing or just mindset or something that he really instilled into you that you still use?
Well, I know you said one, but I guess the two that I would wrestle with, I would say to be grateful. He'd always say you can either be a victim or you can be grateful. It doesn't matter what obstacle you're looking at or what the adversity is, you can be grateful and find an opportunity. So gratitude. And then the second one is just being a lifelong learner, because that's kind of what set Kale apart. He was very innovative before his time. He was hitting ankle picks. He was a prolific scorer at a time where people were wrestling real marginal. And he was an upper weight guy too, doing this at the upper weight. So either being a lifelong learner or just being grateful. Those are like kind of the two biggest takeaways.
And now that you've made your transition into coaching, have you learned things kind of as a coach that now you look back and you wish either you'd been more coachable, something that kind of frustrates you now that you didn't think of when you were competing, or is there like a particular aspect that you kind of wish you'd known before that kind of coaching has revealed to you?
Yeah, I think probably doing things more in moderation and not being such an extremist. It's not beneficial to break yourself every day. That's too excessive, and it has a chronic effect. So I would say in the earlier part of my career, it was, I got to be way more coachable. I just want to like run through a wall every day, and I just don't want to follow the plan. And then in the middle, I think I was too coachable. Then I kind of didn't have my own flavor and my own system that set me apart. And then once I kind of hit my stride in 16, it was such a great opportunity, because when you make an Olympic team, then basically you have everybody in the whole country coming together to help you. So you get the best of Iowa, you get the best of Oklahoma State, you got everybody helping you for your country. So at the end, I think I had a good balance between, this is my style, this is how I'm going to be successful, but also let me be coachable and let me listen more than I talk. That was kind of at the end. In the beginning, I want to do all the talking. A lot of times you see these young guys, they have all the answers already. And it's like, listen, buddy, we've all been there. This is what's going to happen next. So listening more than you talk, that was probably the biggest thing I wish I could have done in the beginning.
You talk a lot about the mind and the mental aspect. From what I've heard, Kale has some interesting mind games he used to like to play. Are you allowed to discuss those, or did you sign like non-disclosures about some of the stuff he would do to you guys?
I'm out of there now, so I'm in the clear. But yeah, he's got a real different way of punishing people and stretching their minds and breaking them down. Most people, they take the one-dimensional approach, and it's all physical. Let's just do more, go harder, go longer. A couple of Kale's classics are he'll find a song that's just, it doesn't matter who you are, the song will just eat you up because it's so annoying, like that Gummy Bear song. And he would just play it on repeat all preseason, 4 weeks straight, 24/7 in practice, during the warm-up. It would be on the screens, on the TVs, and you're like, yo, what is going on? Another time, like, I lost focus in a match and I was yelling at the referee. So for a week straight, he had like a duck call, and he was just sitting behind me when I was wrestling live all practice, hitting the duck call in my ear, and it really did kind of break me down. But just like weird stuff like that, like a lot of like subliminal messaging and a lot of brainwashing and programming and trying to program us with the right message. And it was always a good message. I mean, it wasn't trying to program us with, anything bad or anything evil. It was always virtuous stuff. And I think that's a big part of mindset training. It really is the programming, the constant message that you get, from the people that you surround yourself with, and also from how you talk to yourself internally, your internal dialogue, and externally, some things you don't even know. Like we'd have signs hanging up all over the place that said celebrate or national champs. We had a big vision board with all of our pictures up on it. Kale has a big vision board right now in his office, and he has like all this random stuff. Like maybe it's the 57-pounder breaking through, or maybe it's people's goals and stuff like that. So a lot of programming and a lot of kind of unorthodox methods, but they're fun.
I like that it's kind of like a mix of torture techniques and like really positive thinking. I think it's a good combination.
The other one that he does a ton of, I should say, is he tells everything in a metaphor. Everything's a metaphor. Everything's a story. Everything's a parable. And the reason why I like that is because I could, tell you stories I heard my freshman year, that really stuck with me, because I had a good mental illustration of gratitude, or I had a real mental illustration of, long suffering, whatever he was trying to, kind of teach us, made it, you could remember it better, and you could also just kind of repeat it more in my head.
So your last year at Penn State, you go on to win the national championship and you're undefeated. Did that get stressful at a point where you were almost getting nervous that you might just mess up a match, or was it the other way? And once you just kind of kicked the ball down the hill, it was, that's 21, that's 22, that's 23, like nothing's stopping me now.
Man, I wish it was the other way. That was really stressful. After my junior year, I got my butt whipped in the finals. I got absolutely destroyed. Public failure at its worst. And I remember like waking up the next day, my junior year, I kept saying, I want to be a national champion. I want to be a national champion. And I kept saying, like, I would say, if I make it to the finals, anything can happen. I'll win if I'm out there. And it was kind of passive, because then I made it to the finals and I basically just relaxed. I didn't feel stressed. I didn't feel all of that pressure and that tension that kept my mind sharp and kept me in the right flow state. So when I woke up the next day, I was like, I'm going to use every single day. I know people are going to take 3 months off after this tournament. I'm going to use every single day, just to have that laser beam focus and try to make it happen. So it was stressful. I mean, every time I made a mistake, I felt like it was, the end of the world, but it really kept that single-minded focus for me for so long that by the time I got to the nationals, I had some adversity at the national tournament. I went maybe 20 matches in a row where I didn't get a point scored on me. I went pin, tech at the Big Ten tournament. Didn't give up any points in those techs either. All my points I scored on top. Got OW. My first match at NCAAs, I beat an All-American 10-0. And then my second match, I got taken down first. Guy like poked me in the eye, scratched my retina, ended up winning 6-5, kicked out of a takedown and tore my MCL. So I had this major setback, but I had this single-minded focus. Like I couldn't forget that goal. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't forget it. And I think you'll always fight as hard as you work. So in a way, I think it was probably not, it was kind of toxic for me, but it also just really helped me get through that adversity. Had that injury didn't happen, maybe this is cocky, but I think I still would have walked through the tournament. It made it a different tournament for me, but having that obsession made it hard to give up.
You talked before about the like mental aspect of wrestling. Did you notice your opponents approach you differently when you were then on that kind of undefeated run? And did you start to feel like you had a psychological advantage when you stepped onto the mat? Did you feel, and was that just your perception, or do you actually think that people were starting to approach each one differently?
No, that's a good question. Yeah. I mean, I would always say, because I was never ranked first until my senior year. So basically, you start with your age group guys. You graduate high school, you start with those guys. So my goal was always like, I knew eventually if I got to my senior year, I would pass the guys that were in my age group and I'd be ranked number one by my senior year. That was always kind of my thought process. But I'd always say, I don't even want to be the number one ranked guy. It's stupid. I don't want to be ranked number one. It puts a target on my back, but it's weird because when I was the number one ranked guy, I couldn't lose to the number two guy. I couldn't lose to the number three. I was number one. I can't lose to 4 or 5 or 10, and and the year started, I kind of started really fast. And then I had a slow period in the middle. But once we got closer to February, March, those postseason months, I just wanted people started picking neutral. People started, I could tell they were giving up before they even went out there, and maybe these were people I wrestled the year before who were still 2 or 3 points away from beating me. So it made a difference. But what made more of a difference was when I started to dominate and widen the margin, then people came out there more defeated.
So then from there, you make the transition into deciding, you want to continue with it as a career. How difficult of a decision was that given, for those who aren't aware, wrestling collegiately is a little different than freestyle wrestling that you would see in the Olympics. It's a lot more throws. It's a lot more technical, I think. There's a lot of aspects that freestyle wrestling has that you don't do at the collegiate level. So, I mean, with that in mind, with someone who, I know you had done some freestyling during that time, but not to the extent that a lot of these guys, obviously, who are, doing almost a whole career in freestyle wrestling, but also, wrestling collegiately. How difficult was that decision to make?
It was really uncertain because I only did one tournament in college. That was when I cut to 138, 20-pound weight cut. But that was my only freestyle tournament. I had another tournament I was going to as a kid to Fargo, but then my grandfather had a heart attack. So I had 0 freestyle experience. And to put it into perspective, it was 2013. I was coaching at Rutgers University. I was dating my wife at the time. She was making good money as an assistant coach, like 40 grand. I think I was making like 65 grand. We were making almost over $100,000 coaching college athletics, and they dropped wrestling from the Olympics and then they reinstated it. And I just felt like it was an incredible opportunity. Wrestling was supposed to be gone now. This might be the last Olympics forever. Maybe I should give this a shot, and we walked away from a perfect life. We had a great life in Jersey. We had lived in a nice place, and we gave up $100,000 salary at the time and went for 30 grand to go back to my alma mater and train for the Olympics. So I was out of my mind. My mom tried to talk me out of it. My dad tried to talk me out of it. Everybody tried to talk me out of it because I had no freestyle experience. And before I even told anybody I was going to do it, I said, let me go up to Lehigh Valley. That was an hour away from Rutgers. And let me just wrestle with their guy because he's been ranked like 8th. He's currently like 8th on the Olympic ladder right now. Let me just see how I do with him. And he kicked my ass. I couldn't believe it. Like, this is a guy I would destroy in collegiate. I would beat him 10-0. And he got exposure. He front headlocked me. He turned me on top. He Winn-Dixied me and tricked me. And I was like, I came home and I was like, Kara, I am so bad at freestyle. Like, I don't think I should do this, but I decided to do it. And it was a great journey. I always knew, though, it would make me a better coach You know, if I held myself to this fire for another 10 years and, you know, the experience I was going to get in at the next level, the elite level in freestyle, it would be second to none, you know, and that was a big motivation too. I think it wasn't the end all save all. If I didn't become an Olympian, my life was over. You know, I knew that I would take back way more than it would give to me anyway.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I think it's the unique aspect, right, of these kind of collegiate sports then transition where the Olympics becomes the post-collegiate pinnacle. I always think it's not something that I ever got to experience in terms of the sports that I was always involved in. The pathway would have always been into kind of like full professionalism, and then you could kind of see the path in front of you much more clearly than I guess you can in some other sports. So it's interesting to see like how much you have to weigh up, like what the risks are and what the rewards are and what the other opportunities are.
That's right.
I know that people are going to have a lot of, because to me, I mean, the fact that you're like you were an Olympian, that's like I have so many questions about what that was like. I know that your path to actually qualifying for the Olympics was unusual and maybe involved like a couple of incidents that most people probably won't have gone through. I guess if you could tell us a little bit about that, because it's a really interesting story.
Yeah, I'll try to give you the short version if I can. Well, Olympic trials, I'm seeded 9th. So my first round, I wrestled a guy that beat me 4 times in freestyle. Kellen Russell, 2-time NCAA champ, beat him 14-4. My second match, I go against Brent Metcalf. He's 4-time world team member, so he made the world team the last 4 consecutive years. He's a number 1 seed. This is in Carver Hawkeye Arena with 15,000 fans, and I beat him with 10 seconds left. I took him down. I was so tired they carried me up the stairs after the match. Like I don't even know how I won the match. Then my next match.
Just for you guys who don't know, so Metcalf went to Iowa. So imagine him wrestling a Iowa legend in front of a 99.9% Iowa crowd and beating him with 10 seconds left.
Yeah, they weren't happy. They didn't receive me well the rest of the tournament either. It made it more hard. But then my next match, I wrestled the guy who was supposed to be the Olympian. His name was Logan Stieber. He was a 4-time NCAA champion for Ohio State. And he was the guy, you know, and I'll never forget that match. It was the hardest match I've ever won being that tired. I'm talking like out of my mind tired. And I remember when I looked up, when I walked out there before the match, they had all the Olympic coaches sitting at the table and all of our national team coaches. And I remember I swung my head back and looked at them after I won, and they were in disbelief. They're like, I can't believe this guy just took out our Olympian. And then in the finals, I wrestled Bellator fighter Aaron Pico, and he was kind of like the golden child at that point. You know, they were hyping him to be the Olympian and to be the guy. So that was another huge hurdle I had to climb. I lost my first match in the finals. So in the finals, it's best out of 3 to make the Olympic team. I lost my first match, and then I won my next 2 matches, came from behind my second match, and won 4-4 on criteria. But it's not over yet. I'm not an Olympian because I won the Olympic trials, but they didn't qualify my weight class because wrestling only gets to qualify X amount of spots for the Olympic tournament. So 4 days later, I fly to Mongolia, Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia. And you had to make it to the finals. I made it to the semifinals. I lost to multiple-time world medalist Yasar Gore from Turkey. So I don't make the finals. Fly back from Mongolia, like 35 hours of traveling to get home. And 5 days, because I could have stayed over there and just went to the next. There was 2 tournaments I had to go to. I could have stayed over there, but I decided it would be more beneficial to recharge, see my family, that kind of stuff. Went home. Came back to Turkey, Istanbul, and now I have to make the finals to go to Rio, and the draw comes out. I have the hardest possible draw you could have, no exaggeration. Because it's in wrestling, they randomly pick the draws. You step on the scale, you press a button, the number shoots out, and they order it according to that. And my first match, I wrestled 2013 world champion from Armenia. I beat him 3-2, close match. My second match, I wrestled this guy from Japan, multiple-time world medalist. I was losing 5-2, came back, got a 4-point throw, beat the guy at like the last second. And then I dropped my quarterfinal match to a guy from Bulgaria, and it was over. You know, I went into the back and I just like collapsed on the ground. I was like crying. I'm like, man, I let my country down. I can't believe I blew this thing for our country, blah, blah, blah. I had all that for hours, you know, and I got my bag and I went back to our spot in the locker room and I started picking my stuff up and walking out. My Olympic coach, Bruce Burnett, he goes, what are you doing? He's like, where have you been? I was like, I was just hiding under the bleachers. And he's like, well, I feel bad for you, but it's not over. And I'm like, what do you mean it's not over? He goes, if you take bronze and anything happens, you'll be the next wild card that goes to the Olympics. So I'm like, all right, that's crazy. Like, I can't believe I wasted all my energy crying and complaining. I'm like, when am I up next? And he's like, you're up next. I'm like, no way. He's like, you're on deck right now. Take my stuff off, walk out there. I wrestled a guy that beat me 10-0 that same season. I beat him. And then my last match, I go double caution to double caution. 3 cautions and you get disqualified. And this guy was headbutting me. I was headbutting him back. We were fighting each other. I beat this guy for bronze, and that's it. You know, and they told me like, hey, don't get your hopes up. You know, we don't want you to get your hopes up too much, but just stay positive. And in my mind, like the whole journey, I knew I was going to the Olympics, you know, and I wasn't going to believe otherwise. So about 2 weeks later, I'm on the golf course, just kind of passing time, you know, waiting for that miracle phone call. And they called me up and they said, hey, you know, you're going to the Olympics. 2 guys failed their WADA drug test at Europeans. It's a snowball effect. It goes all the way back to that quarterfinal round in Turkey. And we go to that bronze place match that you won. You're going to the Olympics, you know, and I'm like blown away. One of the most gratitude I've ever felt in my life. You know, I couldn't even call anyone. I remember just like laying on the ground. I was so happy. I couldn't do anything. And 2 weeks later, so now I'm like training for the Olympics. I get a phone call. They changed the ruling. I think it was like a EPO type of drug that they got popped with. Now they said, we're going to let these guys back into the Olympics. So your spot's no longer there. And I'm like, I'm crushed. I can't believe it. You know, I'm still believing that I'm going to go to the Olympics. Our coaches call us. They're like, hey, if we got to get lawyers, we're going to fight this thing, you know, don't sweat it. And, you know, I prayed and I remember like I went on a fishing trip. It was like a half day, 12-hour. We were out there all day. And I said, please, God, like when I get back, let me have good news. And sure enough, by the end of that night, I found out I was going back to the Olympics. Our delegation said that we can't do that. They said they can't do that to you. They're making an exception for one time, and they're going to have one extra person in there. And we're going to let these 2 guys that failed the drug test go in there. Well, it turns out I wrestled both of those guys at the Olympics too. I wrestled both of them on the backside of the bracket, trying to wrestle back to a medal match, and I beat both of them. But that was kind of the progression. You know, I thought I was going, then they took it away, and then I was going, and then I wrestled those guys. So it was crazy.
That's insane.
What an underdog story.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Did you finish your golf game?
I did. I finished my golf game. Horrible as usual. Thought I was good. Fun day though.
How, I mean, I guess without maybe naming names, how prevalent is doping in wrestling? Like, is that something that you've seen? Is it common? Is it a kind of secret that everyone knows about, or is it unusual?
No, I think it's pretty common. You know, I think some of it's probably more that people are finding a competitive advantage and maybe they're using a supplement or they're using some sort of recovery method before the testing catches up, because, you know, you're talking $1,000 for maybe one. I don't know how much the USADA test costs, but they can only test so many parameters and so many things. You know, it's so many athletes. So I think a lot of it is people are finding ways around the testing, but you know, I think it's happening a lot. I think it's just a matter of time, though, before the testing catches up. And the one funny thing about USADA, maybe most people don't know this, but they save the samples for 7 years. So basically you go in there and maybe it's 120 milliliters. Yeah, you have to provide, and then half of that goes into a vault. And then the other half goes into your testing. And then you'll see guys, like I'll see guys now, 2012 heavyweight from America. He took 5th place at the Olympics. He lost for bronze, but then they went back and now they have a different testing method. They were able to test the guy he wrestled because they retest all the samples. He failed. He failed for a performance-enhancing drug, and this guy wins a bronze medal in 2019. So 7 years later. So I think it happens. It's just the testing can't keep up with some of the supplements.
How does someone feel about that? Like when you get awarded a medal years later, like obviously it's not happened to you, but do you feel like you've won it, or do you think because the other guy was cheating, or does it kind of feel like a little hollow?
I'll convince myself I won it if it happens to me. I'm okay with it because, the margins are so narrow. You look at I look at, say, 2015 to 16, I wrestled maybe 60 matches. About 80% of those matches are like 1 point. And even 25% of them are like tied, where I won on criteria. So you're talking margins that are so thin, all of a sudden you do a blood transfusion or you do some EPOs and, it makes a big difference at that level.
Yeah, especially I guess you mentioned how tired you were. And I guess if you're doing anything that boosts recovery time or anything, that's going to be huge in a tournament. One of the other things you mentioned during it when you were going through the Olympic trials, kind of stunning the Olympic coaches. Did you ever get a feeling that obviously they want the best person to win, but they might not want you to win? Like if they think another wrestler has a better chance in the Olympics, it's kind of in their interest to have the best guy, right? Like, do you ever get a sense of disappointment that they're like, good for you, but we would have rather had this guy because we think he's got a better chance of winning a gold medal?
Absolutely. It happens a lot too. I think the difference is how you respond. Some people, they just believe them, and they give up and they're okay being close. I'll give you a quick story. In 2014, we had a training camp and it was actually at Tempe, Arizona. And this was a turning point in my career. The national team coach had a recovery day and I was getting ready for like the Pan Am championships at the time. Pretty big deal, for wrestling. And we had this like sauna session and I went in there and he's like, no, sorry. You can't come in here now. It's only world team members, university world team and junior world team right now. And there was like 7 seats. Like I could have sat anywhere and there was so much room. And I was furious, and I remember I went to the locker room and I laid on the ground and I just laid there for 10 minutes in the locker room. And I just tried to remember it as best as I could, because I'd visualize the lockers, the people's name, the numbers, what was in the locker. Because every time I felt sorry for myself, I would think back and visualize that feeling of, I'm not good enough, and when I go to those training camps, I always had a chip on my shoulder because, I was stupid enough to think I was good enough at the time. And, I think some people take it the other direction though, and they make that their end all. But the other side of it too, there's external implications like referees, like where they seed you, the seeding committee, like where they put you at the ranking tournament. It makes things a lot harder when you're not the guy, when I'm the guy, when we're picking our guys for the wrestling team now, it's like, we know who we want. We also want the best guy though. That's the thing, so we want to make sure that we know who the best guy is when we put him out there. We don't want to just take this guy because he's the golden goose on a silver platter and then he goes to Worlds and he folds at the highest level. We want to make sure that we test them all against each other. And I knew I had to prove to them because right after the Olympic trials, they sent us to World Cup. And this was probably the hardest. This is probably my best tournament in my whole career and most memorable. And I'll never forget the experience. We wrestled at the Forum in Los Angeles, or wherever that is. And we met a bunch of, celebrities. And the World Cup was the testing event for the Olympics. You had 4 different opponents, the best of the best from Azerbaijan, India, Russia, and Georgia. And everybody was like, man, we got the wrong guy. Molinaro sucks. We should have this guy in there. We should have that guy in there. So that was kind of my opportunity to earn the respect of my other wrestlers and my peers. And I had a great tournament. I beat 2 world champs, that eventual world champs, and they were all world medalists. And I beat the guy from Iran who was second in the world the year before in like a come from behind victory. So I had to earn that spot and prove it to them.
So getting back a little bit to transitioning to freestyle, now that you look back with all the years that you've done freestyle wrestling, do you think it's more fun? I mean, because it's, I think one of the things you're most well known for is just demolishing people on the mat physically, like picking them up, throwing them, smashing them, so is that something, once you got better at it, looking back, is that the more fun part of it, doing freestyle?
Yeah, I think freestyle is more fun because it's more complex. There's so many different sequences. There's so many different ways to score. You could win a match in 20 seconds. You can make one mistake, get takedown and laced, and lose the match. In freestyle, I think it's more about control. It's more about strength and conditioning. It's a little bit more marginal. In freestyle, it was just, you're always so vulnerable when you're out there. So I always like that aspect. And also that there was all different ways to score. That was cool.
So I guess take us through the Olympics. I mean, I guess that's where we'll have a bunch of questions. I mean, I guess let's take it from where you left off. You find out you're on the team and now you're training. How much time do you even have to train until the actual Olympics? Like, what was the break like?
It was a couple months, getting on my routine, a few national team training camps. We did like a simulation in Colorado Springs where we went there and had a camp and then did a tournament. They like try to make it as realistic as possible to the Olympics. Afterwards, they interviewed us in like a fake interview booth. And so there was that whole process, which was really great for me because people stepped up, and I learned more in those months than I learned in decades of wrestling because you're getting the best of the best from everybody, like I said before. And I was still a sponge at that point. I had a lot to learn. I was kind of young, rookie, about to make the Olympic team. So there's that process. And then there's the process of going through Texas and getting all your gear and doing all like the photo shoots and the interviews and kind of wine and dining you through that. That was extremely fun too. And then we get to the Olympics and I'm on the last day, the last event, the last thing, so I was there for 21 days. The first 4 days we spent in the village. They let us just like have fun and embrace it all and soak it all in. And then they took us off site, all the mixed martial arts people, the judo, karate, all that stuff. We were in this little village. We brought all of our cooks, all of our, staff from the Olympic Training Center, USOC. They just hooked it up, and it was in this private village. We trained there for 21 days. Kind of fun fact, the third day I was there, so my wife, she wasn't due to have our baby until 3.5 weeks. 3.5 weeks, like it was after I got back, so I think there was like 2 weeks in there where I was like, all right, we should be good. Well, the third day I was at Lone Air, she had the baby. So, I was the last event. I spent 21 days just talking to my kid on FaceTime till I even got to see him. And it was a month before I got to pick him up by the time I got home from Rio. So had a baby, during that time. We call him the Olympic baby because he was born during the Olympics. And then the last week is really just about getting into that state of Zen where I'm just focused on my technique and tactics and nothing else. It's just the most boring days you could imagine. Waking up, do the same thing every day. I wake up, take a walk, go eat breakfast, come back, stretch, go to practice, eat lunch, take a walk, going through this routine for 7 days, not looking at my phone, just really just trying to get into that real state of peace. And then it goes to excitement. Now I'm at the actual venue, did all the simulations, did all the training, made weight, and I'm on deck warming up for my first match against world champion, 70-kilo world champion, Gidzaev. He's a Russian guy competing for Poland at the time. And I just remember I kept thinking I was blown away. I kept saying my whole life in kindergarten, they gave us a yearbook and they said, in 20 years, I want to be a blank. And I was like, well, I ain't going to be in the NFL. I'm not going to be a doctor. I love wrestling. What's the best I can do in wrestling? I said, I want to be an Olympic wrestler, and I held on to that pretty tight my whole life. I kept I was really far away, but I'd always tell myself, I can beat anyone in the world. You know, someday I'm going to wrestle the best guys in the world, and I can beat anyone in the world on any given day. And I remember just when that hit me in the warm-up arena, you know, 5 minutes before I was walking out there, I remember thinking, like, here I am wrestling with the best guys in the world, wrestling one of the best guys in the world, you know, then just walking out to the mat. It was just kind of surreal, and won my first match, lost my second match to Olympic champ, 2012 Olympic champion. And then I wrestled back to a bronze match where I fell to Frank Chamizo. He's pound for pound #1 ranked guy in the world right now at 74 kilos. He's competed for Italy. He was a Cuban defect that competed for them. And I lose my bronze match 1 second. I have both the legs. I take the guy down right at the buzzer, thinking I won the match, and 6:01. Time was expired 1 second before, so fell in my bronze match, and that was it. It was incredible. Had my family there, all of my friends. It was really just the culmination of all the hard work. You know, like I said, I never really took more than 6 months off since I was 4 or 5 years old, and you know, it all kind of came to a head when I walked out there and got to compete with the best guys in the world. So, man, it was a sense of relief too, because there was a little fear in me that, God forbid, I get hurt in my training, right? God forbid, like I sprain my ankle, or I just wanted to get to that warm-up area and walk out and step on the mat, and then I would be good.
Yeah, no, I can get that. Just for the record, I wanted everyone to know who hasn't listened to our previous episodes. A couple episodes ago, we got asked whether you'd rather be an Olympic champion or an astronaut, and I was the only one who chose the Olympic champion as being the cooler thing. So Frank and Sam can tell you how impressed they are by you.
A question for me, like when you were in like the Olympic Village, did you find yourself like mixing with the other kind of Olympic athletes from other sports? So you said you got taken away to like the mixed martial arts. Did you mix with them? Do they kind of stay and do their own thing? Because I remember for the London 2012, there were always these stories about how the Olympic Village had like a really good spirit and everyone was like mingling and getting to know each other. Was it the same with you and the wrestling side, or did you kind of stick to yourself and your team?
Yeah, there was like a couple people from different sports, you know. Maybe it was like your routine to go to the training room and get like heat or ice after practice. And, you know, you start seeing the same people, and then all of a sudden you're kind of like in on their story and following them through their training and following them on, you know, when their day competes, you're watching them compete and cheering them on. So there was a lot of that, you know, just kind of attaching myself to people in different sports and kind of enjoying the whole process with them. Some of them were multiple time Olympians. So these are people I watch real closely just to see how they went through the process. And everybody is so generous with information, you know, especially from your own country. Everybody wants to help share knowledge and share information. So we did a lot of that, and just did a lot of keeping each other kind of positive, you know, just being in that right state of mind. And I definitely had a few people from different sports that, you know, even to this day, like a fencer, and a couple other people that I still talk to and still commenting on my Instagram photos. Likewise, you build those bonds, you know, when it's real hard. When things are real stressful, I think that's where people really build close bonds. And it's always refreshing to do it outside of wrestling. You know, don't get me wrong, I love wrestlers, but it's a little change of pace when you're hanging out with the fencers or the golfers, and it's less intense sometimes.
Are there, when you get in the village, are there certain like athletes that are considered to be the coolest? Like, is there a hierarchy of these are like, oh, we know this sport's those are gonna be like the fun guys to hang out with, or these guys are like too cool, we cannot like approach them?
Well, unfortunately, we couldn't have too much fun because we always have to cut weight and have this weight management thing that glooms over you 24/7. But I'd say the athletes that got the most attention were like swimming, for example, you know, just those big stories, people winning multiple medals. And then the NBA guys that were there, you know, everyone wants to take a picture with Kevin Durant, Ricky Fowler. I took a picture with him, you know, so those people probably got the most attention, you know, those big stories and those athletes that were already established going for multiple Olympic medals, not necessarily the sport.
And do you feel like they integrate as Olympians, like for the NBA players that they come in and kind of like a very different experience to a lot of other sports that are in the Olympics? Do they come in and see themselves as full on Olympians? Do they want to have the Olympic experience, or do they kind of still see themselves as like NBA players, superstars on a level that maybe an archer isn't going to be on?
No, I thought they were super graceful. I mean, they were like the first people to show up at the Olympic ceremony where you walk out there and you do the whole walk. They were taking pictures with everybody. They were joking around, holding all the props up and the signs and throwing stuff out to the fans. So yeah, they definitely embraced it. I'm sure it was different for them than what they're used to, but it was fun having those guys around.
And how was the village itself? I mean, is it like a top end accommodation, or is it kind of being thrown into a university dorm almost? Like, was the food good? Was the setup cool? Did they have like a bunch of big screen TVs playing all the time? Like what was going on?
It was awesome. It was like the perfect oasis for athletes. Basically the cafeteria, you have every cuisine from Mediterranean to just traditional food. You can go eat any kind of food you want in the cafeteria, and you see all these different athletes and all their Olympic gear. Then they had all these different spots. They had a McDonald's, a place where you can get a haircut, a place where you could buy a cell phone. They had all those like gadgets and other amenities. Then you had the recovery centers, which were unreal. Basically everything you need: hot tub, cold tub, compression pants, massage 24/7 you can sign up for. So the recovery was off the charts. And I'd say like USA, everybody had good amenities. Like there was communal stuff, but we had like above and beyond everything. We had a nutritional bar, we had a smoothie bar, we had a mental coach, we had a little chapel you can go to. So they had everything humanly possible in terms of the amenities, and spoiled all the athletes really well. So it was cool, man. They did a good job.
When you talk about like the haircut and the McDonald's, do you have to pay for that, or is that just like free? You just walk in, you're an athlete, you just get free McDonald's, and just Usain Bolt's living there?
Yeah, it was free. Like you can go in there and order with whatever you want 24/7. The one kind of catch was there was always such a long line at McDonald's. You think like
That's
all
crazy.
these Olympic
Really?
level athletes, like you can go to McDonald's and get something. I was there for 4 days. I couldn't even, if I wanted anything, I wouldn't have the patience to wait in line. And the haircut, same thing. Like you'd be waiting there all day to get a haircut if you really wanted it.
The haircut I get, the McDonald's bit is mind-blowing.
Like you were talking about like strict weight management plans, and then you've got lines of these athletes where they're at the pinnacle of their sporting ability in that moment, and there's a line at McDonald's. It's a great story.
Usain Bolt lived off the McNuggets. So I
guess it makes sense too. Like once you've completed your event, how quickly, like if your event had been early on, would you have been allowed to stay in the village for the remainder of the Olympics? Or is it like your event finishes and time to go?
Event finishes, then it was time to go.
So how did that feel, like knowing that you were last up and just seeing the village and the place get almost less and less busy and getting to your moment? Did it make the nerves come in more? Did you become like more apprehensive, or was it just don't care what's going on around me? It's all about my event.
It was made it kind of a little bit anxious, because part of me wanted to just compete and then be able to kind of cut it loose and enjoy everything and soak it all in, but I never really could do that. I was kind of on guard all the way to the end. And remember the last day I competed too, it was still pretty packed, because they do like closing ceremonies and stuff, and then they give out the medals and all that stuff. So we had a couple days after. We all got to go out and, do our thing. We went to the beach with our family and stuff like that. But it poured the last day. I woke up the day I competed. The last day was me and Kyle Snyder. He won the Olympics. And it was like torrential downpour. It was like beautiful weather every single day. And then the last day I competed, I woke up from my morning walk at like 5:30 in the morning, and it was a monsoon. So that was kind of cool.
And I mean, you said how good the amenities were. What was the quality of the actual like overall facilities? Was it up to the standard you would expect, or?
Yeah, they were pretty good. Nothing insane. I think that was also part of the plan. They kind of wanted to make it similar to the Olympic Training Center. You got the bunk bed with the roommate next to you. It was very reminiscent of the Olympic Training Center. They basically just tried to make the Olympic Training Center in this village in the middle of the mountains. But they were good, especially the nutrition. They brought our best cook. Her name's Flower. She works at the training center. Every athlete there knows her. She's super awesome. So the food was off the charts. We were getting like lobster and like all this like random seafood day. They're flying in all this great stuff for us. But in terms of like entertainment and, this luxury, kind of luxurious suite, it wasn't like that. Maybe Tokyo. I'd imagine that would be off the charts.
So I guess the other amazing thing about being an Olympian that Michael Scott would like is the swag. How awesome is that? Do you still have like all your USA gear and stuff that you got from the Olympics?
They gave us, I guess, like the guys that I've talked to, they say like, I know Olympians from 2008, 2012, and they say like every year they just like almost double how much stuff you get. And we got so much stuff. We got like $3,500 worth of like Ralph Lauren. We got a suitcase full of stuff. Then you go to the Nike one and you get another like $5,000 worth of stuff in a Nike one. Then you go get your more luggage. Then you get to go and get a watch, and you get all these bags, and you go from each station and basically get all the swag. So, I still have like a lot of the stuff that they gave me, and I gave some of it away, but I think my favorite 3 items were the luggage they gave us. The travel bags are awesome. And the watch, the Omega engraved watch and stuff. That was cool.
So does the luggage say Olympian on it?
It does, and for some reason,
yeah, that's got to carry some weight when you're at the airport. Like, excuse me, sir, as you grab the bag. Yeah, it's like hold it in front of their face.
They never lose that bag. I throw that in a regular bag. It's not coming back sometimes.
Do you get treated like when you check in at an airport? Do people ever notice and give you like slightly nicer treatment?
Yeah, I've had people ask me like, "You wrestling? You in the Olympics?" Yeah. Blah blah blah.
I have to go out and buy one of these Olympian bags.
Just go on eBay.
No.
That's funny.
So quick question, actually. You mentioned Tokyo, because obviously delaying the Olympics because of the virus. Like, you train, 4 years, 8 years even for that particular moment, and then to have it delayed by a year, how's it affected kind of wrestling? Is it just kind of like the people that were going this year, it's fixed and they're going next year? Or has there had to be like, because a year on, people's fitness changes, people's techniques change, I guess. What's happened? Have they just kind of like iced it, and who was going is still going? Or are there like new trials, or what's happening with that?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, they're still keeping the same qualification. So the people that qualified for the tournament that was supposed to happen in April, this past April, they're keeping all those people qualified. For me personally, I was actually training for this next cycle. I was in state college at Penn State. And the hardest part for me is once I found it was postponed for another year, it's exactly what you said. It's, another year of training for the Olympics. It's probably about 700 to 730 workouts in the whole year. And I was like, all right, wait a second. I got to do another year. I got to do another year of this. Now I'm like 31. So that announcement came and I took that into account. Then there's the most important thing, which is my family. Another whole year of having my kids have to go through this grind with me of making weight and kind of living real marginal. But I was lucky enough that during that time, so they announced the Olympics being postponed. And then probably about a month after it, I found out that the head assistant coach for my dream job, Arizona State, he took a head coaching job at Oregon State. So that job popped up, and then it was an easy decision for me to retire and move to the West Coast and move into this job. And it really made the transition so much easier, because my mind immediately shifted to how can I get this job? and then, then into how do I transition into being the best coach I can. So it kept my mind busy, but still hard to forget. Didn't get that, like we talked in the beginning about apex competition, and sometimes it's 4 years, maybe sometimes it's 8 years, where you're really kind of building into this moment where you can kind of cash in and make it happen. And for me, it was just, it was really a cool thing because it was at my alma mater. It was going to be in Bryce Jordan Center in front of 15,000 fans. And for me, it was going to be win or lose and retire there, but instead I retired in my garage when I accepted the job to ASU. A little bit weird, but.
Did you feel, were other people, maybe as then in this case being a former Olympian, from the coaching staff, were people trying to convince you to stay in and to keep going, or did you feel like still you were kind of on the fringes and they had other people in mind?
Well, my wife probably, she was ready to take this job, because she sacrificed more than anyone. She started by giving up her job in 2013 and basically just, moving all over the country, having babies and, living this crazy, unconventional life for all those years. So I think, that was a hard one for us to both decide because, we make all of our decisions together. But, a lot of my friends, they still joke around and try to jostle me back into finishing out at State College. But, mostly now I'm so entrenched in these guys and my teammates and these kids at ASU and making an impact here that there's really just no time to even reflect on it. I'm always kind of looking forward to this team now.
If an even crazier set of scenario happened and you get a phone call suddenly and they're like, all right, we need you to go to the Olympics. Do you go, or do you just think I'm not in a condition? I will, this happens, 2 months before the Olympics are due to take place. Do you do it still, or do you think, no, it's not possible?
I'll tell these guys, I love you, but I'm gone. I'll see you when I get back. Yeah. I mean, you don't pass up on that opportunity. No way.
Yeah, he just said he's got the nicest travel luggage bag he could get.
True.
In a worst case scenario, he's got the newest version of it.
Yeah.
You can't pass that up.
It's already packed. It's ready.
and a watch for the other wrist.
That's right.
Yeah, there you go. So I guess we can just end on a few lighter notes. Some of the funny things, I guess, about wrestling. So something I guess that Eddie and Sam might not know is in the States, at least, you have like your soccer moms, you have hockey moms who are known for being kind of crazy, and then you have like wrestling moms. How crazy are parents in wrestling?
Listen, you go to a kids wrestling tournament and you're going to see the craziest fans ever. Like, it's almost disheartening for me. I went to a kids tournament the other day. This was last year. And I walked in there and you got like adults screaming in like 5-year-olds' face, for losing matches. And, you got parents fighting in the back and kids throwing their headgear at the referees. It's quite an entertaining experience to go to a kids youth tournament, especially in a Pennsylvania state or a New Jersey state where, it's just saturated with clubs and good coaches and people.
Yeah.
Do you find parents, I mean, I'm guessing a lot of times if your kid gets into wrestling, you may have been involved in wrestling yourself. That's kind of one of those things that gets passed down. Do you find the level of knowledge from the parents' point of perspective is high, or are they just absolute nonsense?
I mean, I think they would probably do better as parents, than trying to be part-time wrestling coaches, fans, encouragers, because a lot of times I see a lot of even a high level athletes, they can't disconnect from their parents. They got their coaches, they got their personal coach who's there with them 24/7, but then you're also entertaining the father, or the, whoever his role model is or parental guide. So it's tough. It's a tough balance, unless your dad's your wrestling coach your whole life. I know kids that their parents were Olympians, Olympic champ, world champs. And I see them coach their kid through the grade level and then kind of give their kid off to a college coach or a program. And even for those guys, it's still hard, even though they know what's best for their kid, it's still so hard for them to disconnect because they think they can help.
Yeah. Like
Would you want to coach? Would you want to coach your kids?
Absolutely. I would want to coach them when they're young, like coach them up on, just having the right character. I think at the end of the day, character wins, especially at the Olympics. It comes down to, character. Everyone's got the skills and drills and all that other one-dimensional stuff. But I want to just coach them up on the basics. And then I'm going to let Coach Kara, my wife, I'm going to let her, she takes them to practice now Monday and Thursday. She's done a lot with them already, like gymnastics, just real functional stuff. So I think my wife will do most of the training, and I'll just be the good cop on the outside, pumping them up. And the cool thing about being an assistant wrestling coach is they're constantly observing the college athletes. And the college athletes are great with the kids. Whenever I bring my kids in the room, they light up. They want to do everything these guys are doing. They run around with them, wrestle with them. So I don't have to do much besides just make sure that they want to do it for their own reasons. And the most important thing is just to make sure they have fun. If it's not something they want to do, I'm not going to force them into wrestling. I know that doesn't work. It's too hard.
Yeah, Frank's just in charge of the mind games. Like he steals he steals their homework periodically, just to give them that mental toughness of having to react to it.
1 week
subliminal
a year,
subliminal messaging going through the house.
I'm programming them. Just wrestling.
What do you mean you lost your homework?
Okay, on that note, this is kind of sick, but the one thing that my parents did that really kind of hooked me was my dad would say, "Hey, you want to go to club practice?" And I'm like, "Nah, I already went to high school practice," or maybe I was at another younger stage, like middle school. Nah, I already worked out at middle school. He'd be like, "Well, you could pick out anything you want from the gas station. You can, buy whatever you want." And we'd go to like Texaco, and I'd go in there, get a Slurpee, a candy bar, a bag of chips, until my mom eventually saw one of the bills, like, "Why are you guys spending $20 in the food mart every practice?" And now my kids, fast forward, I'll say, "Hey, you guys want to do a workout? You want to do a wrestling workout or something?" And they're like, "Oh, yeah," because they know right away they're going to get sugar and candy. When I was at Penn State, we had a kids club, and basically they come in on Sucker Saturday, and they wrestle one match. They learn one move, and right when they get off the mat, they get like a bag full of lollipops and candy. So they're just like, they don't know what they're experiencing. Wrestling, candy, fun. It's all relative.
A low-level bribery never hurt, did it?
Never hurt.
And now that you're retired, how great is it to not have to constantly watch your weight anymore?
Yeah, that's the most miserable part, I think, is 24/7 weight management. And wrestling's a tough sport because you have to cut weight, especially depending on your body type, depending on, are you a fast twitch, slow twitch? Do you have leverage? Are you an explosive guy? Everybody has to be at their most competitive body weight, and you have to be able to get down into your most competitive body weight and do it the right way and perform at a high level. So for me, being a shorter guy, I always had to go down. I was always cutting weight and cutting weight and cutting weight. And now it's like I don't have to cut weight and I don't have to manage my weight, and it's like effortless to remain healthy and in a good weight range. In the past, it was a lot of up and down yo-yo. So probably the best part is that I can train and eat. Before it was a lot of training, but sometimes there wasn't much eating in there, but it's a lot more fun when you can train and eat.
And does wrestling have the same like aggressive weight cutting that you see in other combat sports, like in the 24 hours leading up to a weigh-in?
Yeah. A lot of that, a lot of those aggressive methods have been passed down to the wrestlers now, but it's a little bit harder to go to that degree because most of the time we weigh in and wrestle 2 hours later. So you really can't have too much rapid weight loss when you wrestle the same day, but you'd be surprised how many people will figure out ways around it and still, be able to 10% over their weight class and cut that in a day. I see people cut 10% of their weight. It's insane, but you you see a lot of the methods like water loading and these, keto kind of restricted calorie diets the last couple of weeks. You learn a lot from the UFC guys because they do it at the most extreme levels, and then wrestling's kind of down there. Powerlifting is in there. They cut some weight too, so gets passed down.
And then I guess the last thing with the weight cutting too is how tough is it, especially in these bigger tournaments, to make weight, wrestle a full day, and then have to finish your day of wrestling. You do 3 or 4 matches, you're exhausted, and then have to go and make weight again for the next day. That's got to be the toughest thing ever.
It really is miserable. It's hard to prepare for too. It wasn't always like that. I liked it more when it was one day. I'm like, come on, anyone could show up one day and win this tournament and just be on point, but when you go 2 days, there's so many highs and lows throughout that weekend. It's a roller coaster, and in my case, I'm wrestling 65 kilos, 143. I probably weigh about 165 on average, 165, yeah. And I get done with the tournament, and I'm not worried about my weight during the tournament because I need to win, so I'm eating and drinking whatever I want. I get done. It's usually about 8 or 9 o'clock when you get done at the wrestling tournament. And then we're going to 24-hour fitness and losing 9.5 pounds, or maybe I just lose 7.5 pounds and wake up an hour before weigh-ins and lose the last 2 and I sleep off a pound. So it's exhausting, the 2-day formats. It really is a different challenge. And your body doesn't feel the same. If you're cutting massive amounts of weight, that's why it's more of an advantage now to train closer to your weight class. In the past it was, how much weight can you pull, but still summon the strength to go out there and compete in that big body and that big frame, where it's like now having that endurance, that power endurance and being close to your weight is more of an advantage on 2 days.
I've got one more lighthearted question, I guess. We talk about movies sometimes, and there have been a lot of movies that focus on wrestling. Yeah. Which movie do you think gives the most realistic portrayal of the wrestling experience? And then also a movie that sticks out for the actual wrestling scenes being good, where you admire the technique of if it's an actor trying to wrestle that you think it's good, and maybe a movie where you just think it's awful.
I thought the Foxcatcher movie was pretty cool. I think one of my favorite actors is Steve Carell, so I thought he did a great job kind of playing that role. And the wrestling was okay. It was still, you can only teach somebody that's never done wrestling a few things. You can't really, doesn't look the same. It doesn't look like the same kind of flow. It's not as seamless. So the wrestling's kind of bad. But one of the corniest wrestling movies that I liked was Vision Quest. I think Madonna was in that movie too. It's pretty random, but that was a good one because it was just, I like the story. Underdog. Anyone can win in wrestling. That's why it's good sport.
So the other thing we always like to do is rank. Would that be your favorite sports movie of all time? Or what's your go-to all-time favorite sports movie?
Man, probably Any Given Sunday. I don't know why. I know you think that movie's horrible, but I always like that one. Pump me up.
Well, it's got the epic speech, right? So if anything, the speech will pump you up.
Yeah, that's a good one.
And then, so my last question, I'll keep it lighthearted too. Was there anyone you wrestled that was so gross that you almost couldn't wrestle them? The smell or the sweat or just weird body hair? Has that ever almost happened where you're second guessing, why am I even wrestling this person right now?
Yeah. I mean, I was in rec program. So I'm not even in middle school yet. I'm still in elementary school. And I always feared wrestling this kid off at rec club because I tell my parents this guy smells bad, man. I don't know what's going on here. He's wrestling all weird and smells bad. But other than that, no. I did wrestle a guy though 2 times in my career from Ukraine, and he was very dirty. He bit me at the Olympics. I was turning him and he bit my arm. It's on YouTube if you look it up. Him, Ukrainian wrestler bites American. And he was doing other things too, scratching my fingers, pulling my hair, and crazy stuff, no boundaries.
Do people ever intentionally kind of like not bathe or something to build up the stink? Because I think that's an advantage.
Nah, I think they go with the look good, feel good more. That's the play.
Awesome. All right. So yeah, I think. Does anyone else have anything or? Cool. All right. Well, thanks for having us, or for you coming on.
All right. See you, Frank.
See you guys.
No, it's been good to have you. It's been good to have you for 41 episodes. See you later.
I guess actually, since we're going to get into our football picks because the NFL is winding up, who's your Super Bowl pick? Let's get that as the last question.
Man, I'm gonna ride and die with the Giants. You already know.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah, I'm staying with the Giants. I'm not bailing on that. You know, they win every like decade or so. So, you know, you're going to have about 8-9 bad seasons and one good one. It's worth it.
That would be an impressive Super Bowl champion.
Yes, it would. Well,
if that happens, we will definitely put that quote back out there on our Instagram page. You heard it first from Frank Molinaro.
I told you so. Yep.
All right. Well, thanks again.
Yes, sir. I'll see you guys later.
Yeah, thanks very much. It was great.
Cheers.
No doubt. You guys are good, man. I appreciate it.